Hi, everyone. Welcome to GovLoop's Community of Practice for June. I'm Candace Thorson, Managing Editor. Our topic today is how to get better public input during policymaking and planning, which, to be truthful, is a lot easier to write than it is to say. Um, and before I introduce our speaker and we delve into the topic, if you want to put in the chat, like always, where you're coming from. And then also we have an icebreaker for you. Uh, okay, so what if you just want to put in the chat, like, why do you think public participation is important? Any reason at all, whether you found it to be important in your organization or what you just think it would be if your organization got more feedback from the community, that would be great. And just as a reminder, the chat is it's a public forum where you can share openly, not only for the icebreaker and such, but throughout. If you have comments, that would be great. The Noble County Public Library, we do get a lot of librarians here. Um, Camden County, New Jersey, hell, Fulton County. Fulton County is very often attending. For public buy-in, yep. South Dakota. I need new reading glasses. Um, Idaho, Texas. Yeah, it helps with buy-in. Um, to serve the public and public trust and improve public trust. Provides a baseline for understanding what the public would like to occur, builds trust, improve customer experience, find what the community needs. Yep. Boots on the ground. That's a good way to put it. Accountability, efficiency. Yep. Very good. Know what they need and want for better services. Philadelphia. As I've mentioned before, I'm in New York. I'm about 2.5 hours north of Manhattan. And Shireen, our speaker, I'll introduce her in a moment. But where are you coming from today, just so people know? Rochester? Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading the chat. Not that you're coming from Rochester. I apologize. Go ahead.
Hi everyone. I work in downtown Manhattan. I live in Staten Island.
Great. Public is a partner in everything we do. I like that. We won't know if anything we put out is landing or problematic. Improving services. That's great. So what we'll do is we'll dive into it now. Obviously people in the chat understand that public participation is important. So our goal for today is to talk about what kinds of public participation you can get because it's not all created equal and there are different levels of it. So we're going to talk about that and about how you can decide what kind of participation you need and some of the tools that are involved and things like that. And we're going to frame the discussion. The Environmental Protection Agency has put together this really wonderful resource. It's called Public Participation Guide, and it really can, cogently and organize very comprehensively in an organized way, breaks down all the things you need to know, in my opinion, about public participation. So we're actually going to screen share a few web pages from it. I put together 2 PowerPoint slides, so hold yourself down for that, based on some of the information in there, and we're going to walk through it. And I think tomorrow when we send an email out, like we always do, we'll have a link to it. And then we'll also, I think we can put a link in the chat so you can see, but it really is no matter where you are on your journey of trying to get community input, I think you'll find it helpful. Our speaker today, we have Shireen Candle. She is section supervisor and supervisory public affairs specialist with the EPA. She's been there in different roles for almost 17 years. And she, before that, worked in both the public and private sectors, including at the U.S. General Services Administration. And she's focused on communications and data and editorial projects. She also has a number of certifications and licenses, including from the International Association for Public Participation. So thank you so much for joining us, Shireen.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And I feel like, we don't need to have this conversation. Everybody knows what public participation is.
Very true.
Great answers.
Yeah, they were great answers. So anyway, lay the groundwork for us. Like I said, there are different levels of participation. So if you could just sort of walk us through and, first PowerPoint slide. So if you want to just sort of go through them.
Sure. So I wanted to mention something real quick, just as context. So the public participation guide that um, we developed it when I was working at EPA, but in the international office. I no longer work in the international office. I'm in our regional office in New York City, or based out of New York City. But we developed it because we were working a lot with partner agencies internationally, right, across the globe, on bettering their engagement with the public, right? And so there was a lot of what we found misunderstandings and judgments on what public participation really is. So we developed the public participation guide as a primer to what public participation is and to help. And it kind of, because it's a living, sort of a living website, we've added to it. So we added, a section related to conflict resolution and how public participation, doing it early and often, can help prevent conflict resolution. We've also added like a self-study module because we were doing trainings on what public participation is. So this is where that's coming from. We worked with one of the co-founders or presidents at the time of International Association for Public Participation. For those who are familiar with that organization, the 5 levels may be familiar to you. So it's, inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. Now, we recently, so the Environmental Protection Agency has had different variations of a policy, a public participation policy. So back in 1981, I believe it was, we had a policy called public participation policy, and then we updated it in 2001. So it was like 20 years, and that was called the public involvement policy. And then last year we worked on a policy that hasn't been issued publicly. We did. So the public did get a chance to look at it and provide public comments on it, but it hasn't been formally issued publicly yet. But it's a newer, updated policy on public participation. And the reason why I bring that up is because we have updated these 5 levels in that we are ensuring that first the subtitle, so inform, consult, involve, we've added other layers because we found other folks have used different words, so we wanted to make sure it was inclusive and that folks, especially the ones that worked at EPA in different programs, understood what these levels were. So essentially it's inform or outreach, consult or information exchange, involve or recommendations, collaborate or agreements, and then empower remained empower. And so these levels in this, what we call the public participation spectrum, describes these 5 levels to help us set and communicate clear expectations about how we intend to provide opportunities for public input. We want to make sure that when we do communicate these opportunities, that we use plain language in a form that's accessible to the public, even considering language services. So depending on the community's needs, translating the materials or that we're going to be asking the public to provide input on in a language that is understandable to them, as well as making it 508 compliant. And if you don't understand anything that I'm saying, please ask in the chat and I can make myself clear. And I'm going to try not to speak an acronym or jargon, which we often do at EPA. And also the spectrum helps the public know how to get involved to inform the decision. So those are pretty much the 5 levels of public participation. So as you see in the picture in front of you, the informed level is actually not really considered public participation, but it's actually a very important aspect of public participation. Oftentimes, especially in government agencies and depending on statutory and regulatory, issues, we may not be able to do more than the informed level, or we may be able to only go to the consult level, but throughout the project, we would have to only be at the inform/outreach level. And that essentially is providing information that the public needs in order to participate, fully and with knowledge. So I hope that answered the first question about the five levels.
No, it did, and it's a good point you raised because lots of you have to make sure you're using the same vocabulary. So the idea of revising these to include other teams' terminology for exactly the same thing is a very valid point because sometimes that gets lost and is its own form of jargon, I guess. Um,
Yeah. And similarly, sorry to jump in here, but similarly, when we're creating materials, when we want to make sure we're providing information to the public, we often, especially in a technical agency where we have a lot of scientists and engineers and lawyers, we want to make sure, there are these technical terms that are so important to them, but really don't mean much, right, to the general
right.
public. And so we want to make sure that we're translating what that technical information or that legal information is into plainer language, something that we could all understand, and then be able to process and then meaningfully provide input
Right,
about.
which is what we talk about all the time about the importance of plain language. And we actually had somebody, a speaker for another COP, who actually walked us through the active and the passive tense as a former English major. I thought that was exciting.
Yeah,
And explained examples of plain language and not plain language, and it's very enlightening. You think your language is very clear, and it's not. Because you're talking to a different audience, not peers necessarily. So next, my next PowerPoint slide, so everybody hold yourself down. But if you could kind of explain how can people can assess, that's where I want, like what kind of level is appropriate, like what's the decision-making tree basically, if people can understand this PowerPoint.
yeah. And I would just say this is great to reference, but let's just have a conversation. So essentially,
Yeah.
you want to ask yourself, if you're starting a project and you want to identify what's the appropriate level, you want to start by asking if the public is going to share new ideas or new data or new information with us, can that information, can we change our decision based on that information that's provided? Right. So that's the most important question to ask first. And if we can, right, then we can start asking additional questions. And in this new policy that I was talking about, we actually created the spectrum with similar questions, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the differences between these levels, but also the what we call the guiding questions, which you'll see, which are very similar to what the new spectrum looks like. And if I
Mhm.
haven't, yes, I think I mentioned it, but I just want to mention again that we worked with IAP2, the International Association for Public Participation, to develop the initial spectrum. We used their spectrum, and then we built on that to make it more EPA specific. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Mhm.
So essentially, let's start out with if we ask ourselves that question, and we say, has a regulatory or policy decision already been made? Are you hosting a community event or activity that is not required by statute or regulation? If the answer is yes, then we want to just inform the public, but we can't incorporate public comment. And so we stay at that inform consult level. And then we have something in our spectrum. When you open it up completely, you will see something called the promise to the public. And that is very important because we need to be transparent and honest. So if we're saying, oh yeah, you'll have an opportunity to provide input, but you really don't, that will obviously, a lot of folks in the chat talked about building trust or maintaining trust, or that will ruin that, right? If we're not
Yeah.
being honest with our promise. So the promise at the inform outreach level is we will keep you informed in a timely manner and answer questions as best as possible, right? And then we'll talk a little bit later, hopefully, about the different examples. But essentially, that's how we walk through. Now, if the response to that question was no, you move to the next level, which is the consult inform level or information exchange level. Excuse me, consult information exchange level. And then that also has its own question. Are you required or willing to ask the public for data or information regarding the program or problem or solution? Can the information be considered and used to inform decisions? And if the answer is yes, then we would remain at that level and we will say, we will listen and acknowledge concerns, Sorry, excuse me. If it's inform, we would, sorry, if it's no, we would stay at that level and move back, or can move back to inform. And if it's yes, we can move to the involve recommendations level. And our promise would be we will listen, acknowledge concerns, and provide feedback on your input at an appropriate time. So that's essentially the process in identifying the right level of public participation. Now, I did want to mention that we can use various levels in one project, right? They are not meant to be in consecutive order. It's not meant to go from one level to the next level to the next level in a project. It certainly can, but that's not the intent behind these 5 levels. However, if, as you saw in the previous slide, when you get to the empower level, that's the most inclusive. That's the most public participation you can do versus the informed level, which is no public participation. But if you determine your project or your program can be at the empower level, which is essentially you're giving the decision making to the public, right? All the other levels will be, will have
In there.
yeah, we'll be in there. You will have done all the other levels, um, just by nature, right? You will have informed everyone and done consultations and involved the community if you've chosen empower. And similarly, if it's the collaborate level, it will be everything under collaborate, involve everything under involve, and so on. So I just wanted to make clear that this is not a step-by-step thing. You can choose multiple, one level, or you can choose multiple levels at different stages of your project. So that's how the spectrum works.
One of the things I love about the spectrum and about this as well is because like I think a lot of times we talk about you need to get community feedback, but it's just left as this sort of big amorphous thing like, oh, it's very important to send out surveys, and we talk about how you construct a survey, which is all very, very important, but it's
Right.
like, when should you send a survey, and what do so this gives a real framework, not to overuse that word, but like a structure to help you figure out how to actually do it effectively. So, so then there are a lot of tools and techniques you can do. And so I'm actually going to screen share theoretically. Okay. So this is the EPA website, the public participation guide, and this is the page. And as everybody can see, without giving you motion sickness, all the links to the different sections and such. And this is the page related to tools. So, do you just want to talk a little bit, Shireen, about some of the tools that are available, or how people can, go about getting public feedback?
Absolutely. I just want to make I think I see it in the chat too. I don't see the public participation guide. We see the question slide.
Oh.
Yeah. But I can talk through it
Oh,
while
I'm
I try to
sorry.
figure out. That's okay. That's totally fine. So we have different tools for different levels. And that's what we created in this new policy. And I can talk through that. The public participation guide breaks it up a little bit differently in that we have tools to inform, tools to obtain information, and tools for consensus building. And so there's some overlap in some of these tools because, you know, depending on how you use, for example, social media, you can use social media as a way to obtain information, but it also is used very much to provide, to inform the community or inform the public of what's going on. So there are tools that can be used at different levels. So at the inform level, that's the outreach level. We have different ways, different public participation activities, tools that we use, including, like I said, social media, websites, fact sheets, news releases, Federal Register notices, public notices. So those are just different examples, different tools that you would use to inform the public, right? If you have funding, you can do, advertisements on banners and things like that. So it all varies depending on, your, and that's something that's really important to consider. Your staff capability, your budget, all of that as you're planning your public participation program. But those are some tools that you have under the inform level. In the consult information exchange level, those are things like meetings with individuals, official public meetings or hearings, workshops, public information sessions, hotlines, things like that. Um, just for everyone's awareness, the consult information exchange is essentially uh, receiving data or information from the public at one or two instances, right? Which is different from the involved recommendations level, which is receiving data and advice and information from the public over an extended period. So that's what distinguishes the two. So, some activities, some tools under the involve slash recommendations level could be what we call community advisory groups. So at EPA, especially if you're working in the Superfund program, we often help communities develop community advisory groups, which are representatives of the community, and they pretty much hold EPA accountable. We meet with them regularly. We update them on the site. They provide feedback on concerns, and this is something that's ongoing throughout the life of a project. There's also policy dialogues, small business advocacy review panels, things like that. Those are some examples. At the collaborate agreements level, we have like job training programs. Also at EPA, we have something where if we need to do sampling at someone's home, in their home or on their property, we need to request access, right, from the property
Yeah.
owner. We can't just go on someone's property. So doing an access agreement is a form of involve and collaborate because it's an ongoing engagement. Other things are negotiations, um, consensus permits, things like that. Those are very, jargony, but those are just some examples. And at the empower level, I mean, the easiest example in the empower level is voting. So if in New
Mhm.
Jersey, I think there's a governor election, and that's a form of empowerment. The public, the people, they choose, whom is elected to office. So it's just like developing redevelopment plans, or again, job training grant opportunities. Those are some forms of the empower level. um, but I did want to say that although I say things like workshops and public meetings, those are all great, but there are also within that different types of workshops, right? So we have what we like to do, I like to do, I'll say, is something called a World Cafe, which is a great way to receive, you know, have these small group discussions simultaneously about a particular topic and receive feedback from folks. So it's really what's great about public participation is that it can be creative. You can still, reach your intended goal, but in a creative way. But anyway, well, we can get into that later. But I hope that
I
answers that
put
question.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And I'm sorry I haven't figured out how to screen share whatever. Anyway, but I put the link that I was referring to in the chat. And if you look on there, and that'll also take you to the guide overall. But one of the cool things about this page, the public participation page with the tools, is that there are individual links to like tools that can inform the public, tools to generate and obtain input, and tools for consensus building and agreement seeking. And it has questions that you can ask yourself, like what within those categories, like what kinds of things are appropriate. And there actually are charts that give you like hyperlinks to different things and guidance, like world cafes, for instance, and all the things that you were talking about, but actually gives you puts a lot of meat on the bone and explains how to do it. So I'm sorry I couldn't figure out how to make it work,
Okay.
but seriously, if people check out that link, and it'll take you, to the entire guide that way. It really is worth looking at because I think it's super helpful. So,
Yeah, they give you one pagers. Sorry to interrupt, Candace.
oh
Uh,
no, go ahead.
yeah, one pagers like on the World Cafe or on a charrette. If you're interested in
Yeah,
hosting a charrette or a World Cafe. It'll tell you the advantages, the disadvantages, the materials you need. If you need to, have funding to put a charrette on, for instance, and then instructions on how to conduct it. So it
yeah.
doesn't have that with for every single technique that is listed, but for the really big ones, it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, And then so like if you could kind of talk about how you can ensure you're reaching the right audience, because just, reaching people, obviously there are more important stakeholders for certain things. So how can you make sure you're getting input from the people you want input from?
Yeah, I mean, what we recommend is conducting what we call situation assessments. And the first thing you want to do on the Public Participation Guide website, um, we have two situation assessments. The first one is what we call an internal situation assessment, which is assessing your agency, your office, your organization, and what you have, what your needs are, right? Do I have the people to help conduct this project? Do I have the funds? um, who do I know? Who do I think I can start talking to? It's essentially assessing everything about um, to prepare yourself for a public participation program. Then the second part of that phase two is the external situation assessment, where you're now identifying your potential interest groups and participants, your stakeholders. You're informing potential participants about EPA's interests. You're interviewing people to determine what their concerns are, what their interests are. Are they the appropriate people to talk to? Um, Identifying what the issues are, because we may think that if we're in a community, we may think that there is a concern with, truck traffic. The community may say, okay, yeah, that's fine. That is a bit of a concern, but we're really concerned about the odors that we're smelling, right? So having these conversations are really important and really can help you move forward your program meaningfully. These situation assessments have questions. So the internal situation assessments have guiding questions that lead you to help understand your internal situation. And then the external situation assessment also helps to lead you to the appropriate stakeholders that you want to talk to. But you're also going to learn about that throughout your project. You're going to meet people, you're going to have conversations, people you haven't considered, stakeholders, groups that you haven't considered. And that you're going to learn about, and you're going to say, oh, we didn't consider this group, this segment of the public. Let's go out and talk to them. And that's why it's really important to understand that these levels of public participation, it's not in order. You may have to go back. You've done several things with this, these four stakeholder groups, but now you've learned about this fifth one. You're going to start with that fifth one as well. So it's always that, and it's always reevaluating your project. I think someone in the chat earlier said, making sure that they're, that everything's moving forward. I hope I can find it later. But yeah, you learn, and we just want to constantly be reevaluating our work and who is a part of the conversation, who may be missing from the conversation, and also very important, who's taking up a lot of that space, right? So oftentimes we have, we've all been around groups of people where there's a segment that is not shy, right? They're very vocal. And that's fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is the perspective of everybody in the community,
Right.
in the public. So we want to make sure that we're reaching others that may not necessarily be speaking loudly, but also providing opportunities for them to provide input. So they may not be comfortable speaking aloud. So you want to maybe have index cards at your public meeting, or opportunities for them to talk to you separately on a one-on-one basis. But it's constantly reevaluating to make sure that you're talking to the right people, and that that these folks will really make a difference in your project or program.
It's kind of like when you're teaching a class and, just, there's some kids who, right, or, good or bad, they always raise
Mm-hmm.
their hand and stuff. But as a teacher, you need to make sure that the quiet kids don't get left behind, because they may have even more questions or as a better insight. They just, for
Mm-hmm.
one reason or another, aren't talking up. So you want to make sure that they aren't forgotten. And essentially it's a similar metaphor.
Or different insight, right? And
Different
and so
insight. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, often when we're working in communities that we're conducting a cleanup, they're like, this is what we want. this is what we want. And that's great. That's a perspective, but that is not necessarily this perspective of everyone in the community.
Right.
So we have to make sure that we're hearing from everyone.
So if you and I can't believe like our session is technically over.
Oh,
But if you if an agency is somewhere on its public participation journey and stuff, what advice do you have for them? Either things they should do or shouldn't do or whatever.
mhm.
Like what words of wisdom do you have?
Have a plan, be strategic, create your plan early, be thoughtful, consider what you're capable of, meaning you as the agency or organization, your staff, your budget, everything that we talked about earlier. Be transparent, be honest. It sometimes it's hard because we don't want to we want to do the best we can, but sometimes it's hard to say we just can't do that, or we don't have the funding for that, or and we it's difficult, but we have to be honest. And I think it's also important for us to be humble. We don't know everything, and we
Yeah.
need to make sure that we learn from the communities that we're serving, and that we are able to pivot. If we learn something that is going to make a huge difference. Um, and then you also, one of the, especially for a federal agency, use trusted sources in the community, trusted people in the community. So there's often times where, people don't trust the federal government, or don't know who we are or why we're there. And so it's really important to be with trusted sources. So building that partnership um, is going to be critical.
I can't believe the conversation went so quickly. Like I said, this was really interesting. I am certain that we had a very high attendance. I was watching the attendance go. We had very high attendance. And I'm absolutely certain that people got a lot out of this. And like I said, we're going to, as we always do, check your, inboxes tomorrow because we do send around, so we'll send around the links to this presentation and this, PowerPoint. But I want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Everybody, just as a quick reminder, yeah, I don't know if I'm getting this or not. How I don't know what. Hold on. My problem is I shouldn't have bothered to try and get creative, because that just wasn't a good idea. So now I know that I can't figure out hyperlinks. So that's okay. Okay, there you go. Okay, now you can see the what's next slide, right? Okay, great. Amazing me. Anyway, our next CXCOP is on July 14th. It's a Monday again at 4 o'clock. We're going to talk about how to make your constituent services more accessible, building on what you said, Shireen, about, plain language and things like that, because you can have the greatest services in the world. If nobody can access them, then they don't deliver on their mission. If you want to be a COP speaker, just let me know. My email is in that last bullet there, candace.thorson@govloop.com. We have a monthly newsletter that we send out, and it has lots of information, including blog posts and such that you may not have seen. And we have a LinkedIn group, so feel free to join that and get any of your colleagues. It's a general environment where you can talk about CX issues and things like that. It's we want it to be as interactive as possible. And if you have thoughts on just what this CX conversation should talk about, just let me know. Just email me. But thank you so much again, Shireen. I hope that
Thank you.
everybody has a great day, and we appreciate everything you do always. So have
Thank
a great
you.
day, everybody.
Thank you so
Bye
much.
bye.
Bye.